Hi, and welcome to the 17th edition of the Dojo Kun Shill Shack. With me this week, my special guest co-host is Eric Canete. Thanks so much for joining me, Eric. How are you?
Thanks for having me, man. I'm good. I'm well. I'm upright and I'm not sleeping yet, so this is great. Thanks for having me
Righto.
on.
Yeah. It's always been a pleasure to have you on the show when I was with K Manifesto and then my
Yeah,
the co-host show. But yeah, we got a new thing going here, and it's great to have you on as a co-host. We're going to talk about your project in a little bit. I want to
great.
say hi to Tentacle Pentacle, who has joined us in the chat. Thanks for being here. And let's go ahead and bring in our guests because we want to get moving for them. We'll bring up Mike Barron. Thanks for being here, Mike. Good to see you,
Hello,
sir.
Mike.
My pleasure.
Good seeing you. Thank
And
you for
we've
being
got
here.
Chris Brawley. Thanks for being here, Chris.
Hello, Chris.
So we are here to talk about Mike's project that Chris is running the campaign for, but the project that we're here to talk about specifically is the Thin Blue Line. And Mike, I know that you've been on television regarding that, and you've been on quite a bit of shows. Can you tell us about the catalyst to the story? What brought it about?
A lot of writers rip their stories from the headlines, and I've been doing that my whole life. Anybody who reads Punisher or Nexus knows that. And like everybody else, I was watching television during the summer of 2020 when we were under lockdown. And I saw city after city going up in flames, billions of dollars worth of damage, hundreds of people murdered, destruction of small businesses owned by people who could least afford to lose them, hordes of people rampaging through these cities, looting, and out front, always some precious newsreader addressing the camera saying, "These are mostly peaceful protests."
Right.
And then the calls to defund the police
Hmm.
began, not from cranks, but from elected officials.
Hmm.
And my first reaction, like that of most rational people, was, "Are you out of your mind?"
Hmm.
Civilization depends on the rule of law. Without the rule of law, there's no civilization. And now we saw the fruit of their policy in city after city, Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Manhattan. They're ghost towns now because people are terrified to go down into the city. Police forces have been stripped due to foolish vaccine requirements, and also because many police officers quit because they didn't feel that the government had their backs. And they were right. The government turned on them. Not every government, but the government run by people who I call tapeworms, who go into public service to line their own pockets, enjoy privileges not enjoyed by the general public, and to punish people they don't like. And so I thought, well, what would it be like to be a police officer dealing with this in the middle of a city that's torn by riots? And I thought I'd write a story about that. And as always, when I write a story, my first goal is to entertain.
Hmm.
There's no preaching. There's no lecturing in it. It's there are a lot of recognizable types, but I think that I've marshaled the elements of the story in an exciting and entertaining way. There's not a wasted panel. There's not a wasted word in it. You start reading that story, you won't be able to put it down because you want to know what happens next.
Sure.
The characters are fully fleshed out. And there's a wide range of them.
Yeah, that's the good thing that I've noticed when I've seen you on previous streams, Mike. You're talking about your book. Although it appears on the surface to be one-sided, it is not one-sided at all. You like to provide the perspective for both sides of the story, and I really appreciate that you're doing it that way. I can't wait to get my hands on it. You're right.
Well, thank you. I do present differing points of view. Yeah, I do, but rationally, I'm on the side of the police. One of the reasons I wrote this is I know a number of police officers, and the ones that I know are good people that joined the force to be a positive power in their community. They didn't do it to push people around
Sure.
or whatever, because most police departments that are professional, they weed out those people, and they hire people that are honestly interested in public service.
I would agree. Yeah.
What
And
was
nobody
your
denies that there are bad cops. We all know there are bad cops. So this isn't a story about them.
mm,
This is a story about good cops, and it's an
yeah.
exciting story.
Yeah.
Uh,
What was
and I was,
your writing process like for this series, Mike, or for this book?
at first I had to create a compelling character.
Sure.
So I created. What's your first name, Chris? Baja.
Valeria.
What?
Valeria.
Valeria. Yeah, thank you. It's just mind puffs.
He's
I
written
made her,
5 other stories since then, I guess.
Right.
I made her a single mother because one of the people I used to work out with was a police officer who was a single mother.
Sure.
And I introduced the reader to her before she has anything to do with police work so that you get to know her a little bit.
Great.
Because it's important that the reader has characters with whom they can identify.
Mm.
And this reminds me of a book by John Gardner called On Moral Fiction. And Gardner argues persuasively, I think, that when a reader picks up a book, he has a reasonable expectation that good will triumph and evil will be defeated. And that doesn't mean that good gets off scot-free, because we've all known great stories where the good guy doesn't survive, like Spartacus, for example.
Sure.
And yet he triumphs in the end because he sees his own child as he's dying on the cross. And I try to do that. I don't believe in nihilistic stories. I
Right.
believe in stories with heroes and villains,
Great.
and that the reader has a reasonable expectation that good will triumph. And so it does in my stories. And the stories are designed, first of all, to entertain, but also to reinforce what I think are eternal values,
Mm.
which should be eternal, but they seem to be disintegrating in the wind right now.
Sure.
But eternal values like family is important, religion is important, community is important,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
local control, making decisions at the most basic level is important, and individual liberty, and the right to speak freely. And all of these are under danger right now, and you'll see elements of that in the story. And the story seemed to write itself. A story is a dynamic narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we get to know Valeria for a couple of pages, and then she's thrust immediately into the situation guarding the mayor, and the city breaks out in riots. And she and her partner have to contend with all sorts of people to get out of the city. And there's a lot of dynamics.
Yeah.
Things happen. And then there's a pause when they try to say, what just happened? What is happening to us?
Right.
And then other things happen. And that's just a very vague way of describing the rise and fall of tensions. And that's the dynamics of the story. When I say dynamics, I mean things change.
Sure.
And
Sure.
you move your protagonist from one treacherous situation to the next. They're in trouble. They get out of that. No, another
Right.
situation rises up. There's nothing new about that. I mean, that's the elements of storytelling since the ancient times.
Sure. Yeah, we were talking about this offline, and something that it seems like you just sort of offhandedly just said, "Oh, there's nothing new about that." We were talking about this before we went live. It seems as if people don't have a grasp of that very basic tenet, the thing that you just kind of, you just kind of administer it because it's in your back pocket. You've been doing this for a while. And yet, if you were to read through some of the stories that exist these days, you go like, there are certain sort of like tentpole things that you do that apply to a narrative, some of which you could just covered right now, that people seem to miss just right off the bat in order to sort of build up that tension, in order to sort of get you through, acts 1, 2, and 3. So I think it's fascinating how you just say, oh yeah, those are the things that you should just know, when in reality,
Right.
especially these days, some people don't have a grasp of those things,
Well, I did an awful lot of writing before I got
Right.
to this place.
Right.
And learning how to write was a gradual thing.
Sure.
And there are many comics I wish that I'd written that I would just as soon disappear. But yeah, people come up to me at conventions and they ask me to sign them. I do so happily, and I'm glad that they like this story. I'm probably my own worst critic, but
Sure.
I'm getting happier with what I do, and that's a good sign. I
Yeah.
think my career is about to begin.
Right on. Right on.
Tentacle Pinnacle wants to know why I chose a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for Adopt a Cop. Well, Tentacle, one of the reasons is that our artist, Joe Arnold, who's a full-time police officer, is an accomplished Jiu-Jitsu master. And he trains in it partially because it helps him with his police work. And that's the attraction, is that a police officer well-versed in Jiu-Jitsu can subdue a suspect without hurting himself or the suspect.
Very good. Yeah, in fact, that's on his Twitter page. He says, I studied jiu-jitsu and you should too. I'm sorry, what was that, Chris?
Well, I was going to say, since the character, the single mom, Valeria, she, in the opening page, she's actually advancing a level for her belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it comes into play, obviously, later. It's kind of like the gun you see on the wall is going to be.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, that's great.
It just made sense. Since we're doing a book, since Mike's done a story here that's got a police officer who's active duty drawing it, and it's focused on sort of the looking at policing from the other side of the window. It just made sense. If we could hit stretch goals, we should give back to police. And one of the police charities or programs that we gave money to when we hit our goals was something called Adopt a Cop Bjj. And what they do is for $600, they'll train an officer in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for up to a year and a half until they reach a certain belt level. So we did so well. We donated for 2 cops to do it, and we also donated money to the National Fallen Officer Foundation and National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund. But it just, Mike just, he's a prolific writer. I mean, it's funny to be talking about this now that we're sort of in this printing stasis right now, a holding pattern, waiting on the printer to get the paper that we need to deliver it. Because the book's done, the orders are in, the money's collected. Now Mike and I are talking about other stuff, and yet this will all gear back up in June or May when we get the books and we start shipping them.
People will start showing it like when they open the product and they start showing, look what I got it, I got Thin Blue Line. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we want it to be a fun, like an event. When you get that package, we want you to not just get your book, but we're including these Thin Blue Line patches. It's just basically the blue line going through a black flag, and of course stickers, and everybody. Since we hit a certain goal, I don't know if you guys can see this. My Zoom is terrible, but this is like a metal challenge coin that
so
you
cool.
get when you ride along with police. Well, this is for the National Law Enforcement or Fallen Officers Fund. It says heroes.
Very nice.
On the back.
Well
so
done.
Everybody that backed the book at a physical tier is getting a Thin Blue Line coin too. I mean, just some neat little aspect. And those things aren't cheap. I told Mike, I said, here, we'll save some money by shipping flat stuff, so it can all go in the Gemini mailer. And then I didn't realize, we started thinking of all these cool ideas. And Mike, I don't know if you've got it handy, Mike, your challenge coin from when you rode with the Colorado police.
Oh, that's in the other room. I could run in and get it.
No, don't worry. It's a honker, man. It's huge. It makes that thing look like a dime. And
challenge coins are substantial. I had one printed for Siamese.
Yes, exactly.
And this is heavy. I mean, did you hear that?
It adds to the shipping, but I think it adds also to the feeling you get when you open this up and you get something special. There's something special about it. Gracie University. We actually did look at Gracie University, and Joe actually first said Gracie, and then we went to Adopt a Cop Bjj. Just they had a different way to handle the program, and we loved it.
Pops.
Oh, it's Pops. Thank you, Pops. We did really great on that. Coming up May 15th is Police Appreciation Week, or Police Week, I think is the name of it. So we're going to National Police Week. That's what's happening. And we're going to do something really special that week. And that should be just before we start shipping the books out. So we're really excited that people are still fired up. The campaign is effectively over. Kickstarter is, but Indiegogo, you can still go right now to thinbluelinecomics.com and get the book, get it digitally, get an autograph package, whatever you want. We did close down some of the bigger things because we had to get our orders in.
Right.
The hardcover books were super expensive, and getting your name printed in the book. I mean, obviously, you have to cut that off at a certain point. But man, Mike wrote something. Police aren't very popular right now, and probably for good reason with some of the stories that come out. Mike and I will grouse. We're friends on Facebook, and we'll occasionally say, well, that there's another bad story. There's bad apples. There's bad apples in everything. There's bad apples at the grocery store working there. You know what I mean? That are probably ripping people off. And when these stories come out, do we malign all grocery stores? Well, we tend to do that with all cops, because it is a life or death situation, and they are sworn to uphold the Constitution and to protect and serve. And when you see one that does something dirty, it's painful. But my mom used to work for the DA's office. I'm actually I serve on as treasurer for one of our local political parties. So I'm pro law enforcement. I mean, like Mike says, you're either for the rule of law or you're not. I mean, that's what it kind of gets down to. And the BJJ program, which we love, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program, because what you're trying to do, or what their mission is, they're training people so that they can not only protect themselves, but also to keep from having to use lethal or violent force beyond, this grappling move of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And don't let Mike kid you. He's a black belt. Mike is well trained in the martial arts himself. I don't know if he could take on Joe, but Mike, that's how Mike stays fit.
So do you still study, Mike?
Yeah, I trained today.
Oh, excellent. Very good to hear that. I was a caretaker since college. I studied Shotokan karate.
Nice.
I think to Chris's point about, cops getting a bad rap right now, a lot of that you could attribute to how the media feels about certain things, because you've got certain incidents that get a lot more play in the media than other incidents. And if it doesn't fit the political narrative, then it doesn't get a whole lot of attention. And I think that's another thing that you're running into, not just with cops getting a bad deal, but other circumstances. I mean, you look at the stuff that's going down in Florida now, but the media has a definite agenda when it comes to cops and by extension guns. And I think that plays into it as well.
Sure.
Oh, Don Henley had a song all about that called Dirty Laundry. That's because the media will sensationalize those things that are bad, tragic, etc. And they'll put on, a cop doing something out of the goodness of his heart or being a hero. They'll put that at the very end of the news as a human interest story. And, for a moment they'll do a rah-rah, but the huge, the opening tragic story is the one that sells, they say.
Sure. And that's because it's easy, right? That's an immediate shot across the back, and as far as like an emotion,
Yes.
You show the awful thing and people react awful things. And it's so strange how you can practically socially program an entire set of people to react a certain way. It's fascinating to me to see mainstream media be as desperate as they are to stay as relevant as they can be. And this is a really cheap way of being able to do that, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I think that I used to work in the news. I run a video production company now, and before I did that, I worked at some of the local news stations. And I don't even know if it's like an intentional psychological training that they're doing to people. They do take their marching orders from their owner, so they'll do these PSAs. They'll do stories that are basically native ads. But at the beginning, they do want to do the most powerful story that's going to keep the viewer there through the commercial break. because it's money. I mean, at the end of the day, they need their advertisers, and they are now so desperate for advertisers with the advent of the web.
Yep.
I mean, I don't watch local news anymore. I don't even watch national news. Really, I've got my news fix, and I already know what sources I'm going to check. I mean, how many of us check sort of the same websites almost every day to sort of get your, and it might not be a website. Maybe it's Telegram or Twitter or whatever. You're going to get at least a nugget enough about the story that you can go and find out a little more if it's one that interests you. And if not, you just swipe, you just swipe. And so that's why this, if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, that's a real idiom in the news business, because it will hook you just like a car crash next to you. Nobody looks at the clean car that just drove by if that model doesn't appeal to you, right? Or it's got a kid in the back seat. You might give it a passing glance, but if it's on fire and tumbling and you'll pull over. You'll stay for a minute if you can, or at least you'll rubberneck. And that's just nature. So it's the most base part of us.
To your point, though, Chris, I think what concerns me more is the thing that you said earlier, which is it's not even a conscious decision to pay attention to these things. You know what I mean? It is a subconscious one, and the fact that they don't have enough self-awareness to understand that it's happening is worth a concern, right? To not be that you don't have sort of your radar up, that's something that's being done on a subconscious level, right? That's not even something that you're doing purposefully, right? I think that's incredibly important, especially if you're at the front end of delivering quote unquote news to the general populace. That should be a conscious decision, as opposed to a subconscious one.
You're right, and they may be at a higher level, but the talking heads are generally, and I'm good friends with a few, so I got to watch what I say. But they're
possessed. Sorry, guys.
Hey, and there's more than a few of them that are just airheads.
Let's have a cameo.
It's very.
I love that shit.
And
Okay,
Baron,
hi.
and Baron, hello.
Okay, my radio was possessed. I got a new radio at the thrift store. I didn't know it was going to turn on.
Possessed.
That's okay. Congratulations on the new radio.
I think
so.
They're
I
reading.
think, I think the other thing you run into that there's an unconscious bias that maybe people. Bernie Goldberg has written about this in a couple of his books, talking about media bias and how liberal things have gotten and how they are. But I think now you have with Fox and Newsmax and One American News and all of these other channels that are coming up, you've got Rumble, and you've got a number of different YouTube channels and other video platforms that are providing opportunities for people to report news that's not the quote unquote mainstream media. People are finding other types of news, other angles on news that's not just NBC, CNN, MSNBC, that kind of thing. And I think it scares a lot of them. They're looking at this as a threat, not just competition. Yeah. This is a mortal threat to their entire business model.
What we're doing right now is 5 years ago, people weren't doing these live stream talk shows at a shoestring budget. I mean, you get your headset and a good camera and some lighting and a StreamYard. Right. This isn't even a paid subscription StreamYard account. I see that goose up there. So, but there is a bias, and I think a lot of the times we kind of go for that bias. Mike earlier was talking about Thin Blue Line and how he didn't really write this as a polemic. It's not a sermon. But Mike is independent, libertarian, Republican, conservative. I mean,
Republican.
Well, that's the milieu that he's in, right? And so it is kind of written from. It's not a cop booster story at all.
It's written from a conservative point of view because conservatism works. Yeah.
Well, see. Spoken like a true conservative.
But also he said something earlier that sticks with me, which is there is something to be said about having a visceral reaction of right and wrong when you see something happening, right? Not because it's being told to you that it's the right thing or the wrong thing to do, but because you have internal moral pillars that make you go, I don't think that's right. And not enough people put themselves through the critical thinking phases to go like, does that feel right? Or am I feeling this way because someone is telling me to feel this way? Or because I actually have the internal compass to say, no, actually that's wrong. So Mike put it out there earlier where he said he was watching the news and he said, I don't think that's right. I don't think that should be the way things are. So that's a great sort of jumping off point to write the kind of story that he's written.
And he doesn't always do that. We're working on, we've been dipping back into doing maybe a sequel to Florida Man, which we did last year. And
Right.
nothing political or a true moral compass anywhere in that. I mean, he's got a heart of gold, but he's a shyster and he's always looking for a quick rich scheme. It's just that this particular story, I'll say this about Thin Blue Line. I love the artwork. It reminds me of old Ernie Chan stuff. I remember the first time Mike showed me something. I said, man, that looks like old Savage Sword of Conan, Ernie Chan pencils. And that's all it was pencils and inks at the time. Of course, it's now all color. And I thought, this is great. And then I read the story, and it's a single mom. I mean, it actually ticks a few diversity check boxes, which Mike is absolutely against that. He's all about
I always say this: it's the writer's job to imagine every point of view.
Yes.
And a good writer can do that. And
Yes.
somebody who can't should stick to their narrow alley. And it always comes down to this: should Shakespeare have been allowed to write Othello? What a stupid question.
It is a stupid question.
But
Yeah.
there are people that ask it today. There are people
I know.
that ask it.
Well, and that's it. Going back to what you were talking about, Eric. You get a bit esoteric and ethereal with having this self-awareness, but 95% of the human race has no self-awareness, and unless we're going to have this age of Aquarius or everybody Jesus at the last second, we're not going to have that. So you sort of have to deal with, this is what we're dealing with. This is the
Sure.
reality now.
Sure.
And people don't get it. I'm baffled still that people believe most everything the government tells them and most everything the media tells them without doing a bit. Well, I'm going to, that's what I saw when I was at the airport. So that must be the reality of it.
Right.
Instead of, actually digging a little deeper and trying to have some discernment. There's
For
very
sure.
little of that. It's a shame.
Yeah, no. I think that
Well-
was one of the key tenets that my stepfather has sort of instilled in me the moment I came to the U.S., which is they're going to tell you this one thing, but you have to ask why. Ask why all the time, why they're telling you that thing, right? So I would hope that is still, again, a tenet in a lot of different people. And I'm slowly, naively starting to realize, actually, that's not true. It's easier to be a passive vessel for information, right? They just keep dumping things into you without questioning, without asking why, or thinking of things from the 70,000 foot view of like, why is that so important that lands? They're being very aggressive in messaging that out. Why is that so important, right? And I don't know if too many people ask that question.
As a certified fraud examiner, I've been trained to be skeptical pretty much about anything, and that saved my skin a few times to be skeptical, and I get a phone call, somebody saying that I need to pay them money to keep my power on and things like that, and I was immediately skeptical and saved myself from a scam. But I'm afraid that there's plenty of people out there who fall for such things, and that keeps us fraud examiners in work. But I'd rather have something else to do than keep people that naive, to be honest with you.
But they must be.
Guys, I'm going to bow out here.
I was going to say,
Okay,
we're
Mike,
30
thanks so
minutes
much
in,
for
so
being
Mike,
here.
thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
It was
see
great
you
to have you,
Congratulations, by the way. Thank you.
We'll talk to you
All
soon.
right, Mike.
All right.
See you, bud.
I think more people are asking questions now than they were, and I think some of that probably comes out of, especially with the kids, with the school, with stuff that's going on in the schools.
Sure.
Because the parents and the grown-ups in the room are having more opportunity to examine these things and say, is this the right thing for my kid? Is this, well, wait a minute. If this is going on in the schools, what's going on over here? And you're trying to demonize parents and call them domestic terrorists for wanting to have some say in what the kids get taught.
For sure.
And a lot of the parents, I think that's where the line gets crossed. You're not going to mess with my kids, and they start examining other things. And
That's a great point.
maybe this is not necessarily a great reset, but a great awakening in the masses where they sit there and they start to question everything.
Yeah.
Well,
This
if they're
could be the
lying
beginning
to
of
me
the
about
pendulum
this,
going the other way.
yeah, if they're lying to me about this, what else are they lying to me about?
Yes.
Everything.
I'll be okay with a great reset if it means we're going to get rid of a central banking system. We're going to get rid of mainstream media. Let's just reset that direction.
Right.
How about we go to a flat tax rate too?
Hey, there you go. I think with parents specifically, that is a child. I don't know who here has a child, but it is such a sacred thing having this living being that sort of carries on your legacy after you. It's almost like a time capsule. It's almost like you living forever. It's a weird thing, and I understand parents being protective, and with media or our ability now to get on a smartphone and communicate with people instantly all across the globe. We are exposed to, like I think someone said earlier, it might have been you, Eric, or you, Brian, that said something about maybe it's the media that hypes up these stories. We wouldn't know about them if they didn't talk about it. And obviously the same is true if we wouldn't know about a lot of this stuff if we didn't have the technology that allowed us to instantly communicate with people and check on things or swipe through Telegram and so on. And then it goes back to the issue with me saying, you got a lot of people who don't have discernment. So imagine a parent who is not maybe the brightest bulb, but he's very protective of his family, and he finds out that the teacher is trying to tell his daughter that she can be a boy and it's okay if she likes girls or whatever, and she's in first grade. Well, he might come down to that school board meeting and truly get violent and truly be righteously angry. And he is the villain because he's not savvy enough or disciplined enough or doesn't have enough of an ambassadorial role, and is unflappable. He's easily triggered. But when you get down to the story, the problem is the teacher should have never been teaching that sort of lesson, or should have never been doing that without the parents' consent. And that's going on everywhere. And as we learn more and more of these stories, the question isn't, well, gosh, did you see that video the kid filmed of their teacher? You say, well, how many times has it happened when the kid wasn't brave enough to film it? The kid didn't pull out the camera and all of a sudden, wow, I happened to pull out my camera and there went Bigfoot. It's unbelievable. No, the kid pulled out the camera because of this pattern of that teacher doing this all the time. And it was like, I'm going to film this because my dad doesn't believe me and I'm going to have to show it to him. So how much of this is going on that we don't even know about, where kids aren't filming it or they're not telling? I saw something the other day. It's for Pride Month. And, I don't have any issue with gay people. That's your thing. I mean, I want the government to stay out of my bedroom, out of my refrigerator, out of my church, stay out of everything. I don't want to get anybody's business. But there does seem to be a real strong indoctrination that's being pushed on the kids these days. And this one teacher was planning something for Pride Day or Pride Month, and rule number 3 was what said in the classroom stays in the classroom. Don't tell your parents. And I'm like, what? Listen, if you're sold out on this program, then don't be afraid for a lot of light. Light is very disinfecting and illuminating. Let's all look at it and let it rise or fall on its own merit.
I have to wonder too how much the administrators know that this stuff is going on, because you see some of these like with Project Veritas, you see some of these undercover videos exposing some of this, and then the administrators get involved and they start looking into it, and well, we either didn't know that it was this bad, or they got caught not disciplining the teacher and telling them don't do that. So now they got a cover, and okay, well, we're going to suspend this person, we're going to fire them. But it gets back to that accountability part where the teachers don't want to be held accountable to the parents. The administrators don't have anybody to be accountable to outside of the federal government, and everything that comes from the feds is all of the money. There's all these strings attached. You have to teach a certain way. You have to teach certain things. It's just like that whole thing with the ESG money. Right. If you're going to get our money, you have to modify your process and your methods. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Department of Education is such an insidious evil. It needs to be done away with post haste.
So
Yeah,
Eric the Guapo has a great point here. He says, I am a high school teacher, and I can say, at least in my school district, that a lot of stuff gets swept under the rug because there's a huge staff shortage.
Yeah.
Listen,
Yeah,
I
they don't
don't have an elegant way to bring this back to Thin Blue Line because I have questions for Chris. Right? So I'm just going to straight up ask, like, as clumsily as I can possibly. Before we all sort of went live, Brian and I were talking about your role in bringing this thing to the publishing forefront, Chris. So how did this all start? What was your involvement like? You know, you clearly have a history with Mike, so can you walk us through just the brief version of what how that's all got started for you?
I'll try to give it to you in a nutshell. I mean, because ideally I could pass on whatever wisdom I know, and everybody could just replicate and duplicate it. You know,
Sure. That's the best kind.
I know, right? I wish that there was. I mean, I'm just a hard worker. My background is in television, and there's a TV show that I created all on my own. I just thought, well, why don't I do this? It was called Fuel TV. YouTube, Fuel TV 2001 or Fuel TV 2003, or go to Wikipedia. I'm in there too somewhere. But anyhow, it was an independent TV show, and I just promoted, and we went out and filmed. It was like Wild on E in my region, kind of a magazine travel show. And then, so I always back into things backwards. I did that, and then I sold that trademark and everything to Fox, and they turned it into a satellite network called Fuel TV.
That's maybe how I know about it. Yeah, sure.
Totally nuts how it all came about. Well, then I thought, well, maybe I should really learn what I'm doing. And so I went to work for the local news station and started cutting commercials and so on, and got into video production. Well, my first love's always been comics. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I was the spinner rack kid. Every time there was a spinner rack, we go to the convenience store. I went over there. And I would grab it, whatever looked right. I wasn't spoiled, so it was maybe 2 or 3 issues, unless I had more money. Sure. Well, I didn't really read Mike Barron when I was younger. I had heard of him, and so I had respect for him. So a few years ago, I started Bleeding Cool, this website, which is basically, it's not really a parody of Bleeding Cool, but it's a response to it because Bleeding Cool is so left wing. I mean, they are so hard left, and very big on inclusivity and very big on diversity. So
just for the sake of it.
That's right. There was a story that they were promoting that was nothing but, here, look how diverse this new group is. And in the comment section, I commented, isn't it strange how X-Men 94 didn't do anything, didn't crow about being diverse and inclusive, and yet it went on to be one of the biggest comics of all time? Sure. Why can't comics be that way? And I got shadow banned. I got blocked for that. And I thought, look, a domain, it doesn't cost much money to start your own website. So I just did it and figured it out later. And Mike was a fan of the website. He was a regular reader. And one day he just reached out to me. I don't know what it was. And he was showing me the cover to Florida Man. And I said, man, crowdfunding has become really, it's the new punk. It's the new indie comics. And I said, Mike, you ought to crowdfund this. And he's like, he didn't know a thing about crowdfunding. He's he's old school. He worked at Marvel, Eclipse, DC, you name it. And he said, why don't you do it for me? And I said, well, if you'll cut me in a percentage, I'll be happy to. And so I learned. I went and I followed. I emailed John Malin, who does Graveyard Shift, and just asked a lot of other guys for advice, logistically, more than how do you make it, work out? How do you get fire under the thing? Because I felt like I could do that with the hype. And so, man, I just started pumping out press releases and press release here, press release there, trying to book Mike on live shows like this. I just get people to find out about it. And it was doing okay. I mean, it had raised about 8,000 or 9,000, and it's Mike Barron. So, I mean, there's already a certain cash to that, his name. And Florida Man's funny. I mean, it's just sort of, okay, well, that's more interesting than whatever horror comic this guy's doing or whatever superhero comic, because there's plenty of that. But really, that's what seems to do best are superhero and horror comics, or anything with boobs. That's the truth.
Or all three, right? Horror,
If you-
superhero, comics, and
Well,
books.
man, that's the trifecta of guys.
You
And
know it.
it just so happened that I tried to post it on Reddit, and I think I don't know if you guys know about that, but Reddit banned Mike's comic, not because it was Mike, not because it was Florida Man, but because it was Bleeding Fool had
Oh,
posted.
fascinating.
And next thing you know, a few of my friends like Clownfish TV and some others just picked up that story. Bounding into Comics, John Trent, who is Bounding into Comics is a much bigger version of anything Bleeding Fool would ever be. I think Bleeding Fool is more like the American Thinker of geek media.
Sure.
Bounding into Comics is Breitbart, if you will. I'm sure you guys recognize what's that. And it just took off well. And so what I would recommend for anybody is the mistakes we made in Florida Man was we didn't have the book done yet.
Right.
There were a lot of good pages, and we wound up having an issue with our artists. We had to wind up changing artists
Sure.
in that process, and it took a long time to fulfill.
Yeah.
But we found a printer. Nobody like holds your hand through this. I've been talking with RJ Carter. I don't know if you guys have heard of Critical Blast.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was on the
absolutely.
stream earlier today.
Yeah, RJ's a good guy, and he and I have been talking about putting together a series of videos about just sort of the minutia, step. Here's what you do when you do one of these campaigns. Here's some things to watch out for, because neither Kickstarter nor Indiegogo really say, now, wait a minute, when you're planning your tiers, you don't want to do this. Or if you do a second tier and you have an ad, because it can get really confusing. And we've got well over 2,000 backers on Thin Blue Line. It really took off when Mike
Brilliant.
was news.
Yeah.
But there's so many little things, like did they add the digital? Did they add a second book? And so on and so forth, that you want to try to keep up with. And there's not really an interface that allows you to sort of say, well, let me just see everybody that backed this one book. You can do that, but there's not really a clean way to interface it. And Kickstarter and Indiegogo, while they are like cousins, and you can start on Kickstarter and roll it into Indiegogo now, you can't go backwards.
Right.
And there's so many issues, like Kickstarter will not give you your backers' addresses or email addresses. You can communicate through them directly through the portal, but if you want their addresses, they have to fill out something called a survey. Well, a lot of our viewers came from Fox News, and when I told them, hey, you got to fill out this survey so we can ship it to you, they're like, what do you mean I got to fill out it? I'm not doing any surveys. Just send me my stuff, right? It's not that's just a questionnaire, and you have to put your address in it, but Kickstarter won't give it up. So there's all these little things that they don't tell you about, which they're trying to be all things to all people, right? So I think the best thing I can tell you about trying to get eyes on your comic is it is a hustle. It is everything from Reddit. It is all the Kickstarter crowdfunding forums, Facebook, getting on these live streams, doing these live streams, showing off the art when you can, having a good elevator pitch that's 3 sentences for it, so because it's not going to be for everybody. I mean, listen, Florida Man, Thin Blue Line, that's neither fish nor fowl. I mean, most people aren't looking. I'm into cop comics. No, you're not. There are no cop comics. Don't tell me you're into funny books either, because there's really not many comedy books out there.
Sure.
I'll tell you guys a secret. We may have a publisher for Florida Man ongoing soon. I mean, I hope to see that happen. It could be cool. But Mike and I, we've got several other projects going, and I use Asana to keep the things organized, so I know what steps I want to get to next. Because if you're like me, you've got a regular job or a family or a life outside of this. So this is almost like this side hustle that could explode, or it could put a few grand in your pocket. Right. Or if nothing else, it could give you, hopefully, the satisfaction of having an idea and having it manifest, and then it entertaining or informing people.
Yeah, it sounds like, Chris, this goes back to something you were saying a few minutes ago, which is at your core, you'd always been a big fan of comics, right? So you're going to find your way through it by hook or by crook, and it just happens to be, and I was talking to you just earlier today to somebody to be like, the avenues that we have and by which we can get awareness, the books that we are doing now as independent publishers was non-existent just as recently as a decade ago, right? It's just as recently as 2 decades ago. This thing that we're doing, as you said, like you get some good lighting, some decent microphones, and you can pretty much build your audience off of YouTube and these kinds of live streams. If I was just saying, like, if I had these tools, if I had this toolkit back in the day, the only thing that I would wish for is that time traveling machine and start this thing sooner, so that now I'll have a few more notches on my belt in as far as published books were concerned. But yeah, it definitely has to come first and foremost for a love of something, right? Because you wouldn't jump through as many hoops, you wouldn't climb as many hills / mountains as you would have setting up all, like, learning the behind the scenes stuff, as you said, that's different and unique to both of those platforms if you weren't truly into the business of, like, I just really want to see this made. Because another point that you made is that you have a family, you have a job, you have something else outside of this, right? You could be doing something significantly more, I don't know, profound, and yet you find this just as valuable as doing that.
It's a matter of getting an idea and just wanting to see it through. I know
Sure.
You guys had this idea, Jason, 13 years of doing the sci-fi. For me, this was just an idea at one time. You probably had less of a studio, less of a microphone, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here it's all come together. And I know, at least from my point of view, is I get an idea once I see that it's possible, like seeing that, you mean I can just call this printer, send them the print files if we've got the money, and they're going to ship me legitimate comic books. I mean, just like the old days, I'll have comics to me, that's neat. Or like I was telling you about Fuel TV, doing my own TV show.
Yeah.
So now I've got a video production company, and we do animation, we do all kinds of stuff. And those are the things that entertain me. But as Mike said, in a personal conversation we were having when I went out to Colorado for him to autograph Florida Man, comic books are disposable indulgences. I mean, it's really fluff. It's not the Constitution. It's not War and Peace. It's not brilliant analysis. Typically, it's an entertainment that's meant to be disposable and moved on. And I think that sometimes Mike gets real cynical because, like he mentioned, some stories that he'd rather forget. There's fans that come up and want his autograph, and he'll happily autograph him because it pleases him. But at the same time, you get cynical, and you get, just like the newsrooms, sometimes, or schools, I'm sure there's a lot of times it's just a lazy administrator. You're just kind of doing your gig. That was the job you did that day. That was the comic you wrote that month. And it ain't your best work because, man, you wasn't in a good place when you made it. Yeah. So when you have these projects like this crowdfunding comic book thing or sci-fi, for me, whatever, you've had this idea to do something, you should just put all your passion into it. If you don't have a love, like you're saying, Eric, if you don't have a love for what you're trying to accomplish, if you're just trying to do it to say, well, to say you did it,
right.
It's just not gonna click and come together. And you got to have a good support team that are going to encourage you and give you ideas and promote it for you too.
For sure.
So
let's take a step back.
When you were talking, go ahead, Eric.
I was gonna say, let's take a step back. Something you guys had mentioned. Congratulations, Jason. How many years is it?
13 today. Thank you.
Congratulations, buddy. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Absolutely. I saw you were on the tour today. You had like 5 or 6 shows you went to, and
it's.
How are you holding up?
I'm doing pretty good. I still need to eat dinner, but I'm holding up pretty well. I've been we were on started off with Don Chin's stream this morning, and did a couple of our own, and I was on Critical Blast earlier today, and Peter Smitty's did an open mic tonight, so we've been popping around. And Chris, to your point, talk about having conversations with RJ, I would also suggest possibly reaching out to Clint Stoker and Michael Bancroft down in Australia, because they seem to have been having a number of conversations with a lot of different creators to try to figure some stuff out. And Clint's one of those where it's like, well, we're learning by doing. But he's gone through this now a couple of 2-3 times, and always mentions every time he does one of these campaigns, he learns something new, and he's having those conversations with other creators and trading those notes back and forth. So those two guys might be some good solid.
Oh, they are, and I do know. Yeah, they are good guys. I think a lot of times just watching their videos too, and getting in the chat and asking questions because they love that sort of engagement. Michael is brilliant. He's got something called CG Now, which I thought was a great idea. That all these CG creators that have books, but the campaign's over, but it's still in demand, or it's still available on their eBay page or their Etsy or their whatever, Amazon. You've heard about this book. You don't have to wait. You click the cover and you go there right now. Help to deliver Australian backers, here to help. You might want to hook up with RJ. I know RJ's working on sort of a fulfillment and logistics program. And
so Hockey did that for me in Australia. I sent him a package for my Australian backers, and then he disseminated it from there.
wow.
So that was a big help, because honestly, each of the packages I had charged, or I had asked for pledges to cover $25 worth of shipping to Australia, when in fact it became $75 per book to send it there. And I hadn't charged those folks that money. So, it wasn't their fault. I had to eat that cost. I ended up losing money on Siamese, but, and that's because of the shipping. Now, that was a lesson learned, just like you were saying, that Clint learned something new every time as well. So that's why on my current campaigns, I have digital tiers available, because some folks don't want to pay 5 times the amount for the book, for the shipping that they are for the book. But they still want the content. So, I made the digital available.
I'll tell you the secret to shipping that I'm very pleased with, and it was RJ that turned me on to them. It's called Pirate Ship.
Oh, yes. I've heard of them.
It is discounted, and you can get you can upload a batch of the addresses and everything, and get your laser printer. Bam, bam, bam. It's great, and we still use them today for old orders for Florida Man and so on. I think it's one of the best kept secrets out there is Pirate Ship.
One of the other things you talked about too was that this is a hustle. It's a grind. When I did crowdfund Siamese, I was on 80 shows. And I kept track of them.
That's too many.
I kept track of them, and I put them into a spreadsheet, which I now made available on my website, called the CG Guide. So for those folks who want to do this and go on that circuit, it's a listing on my website of all the shows that are available that are either CG or CG adjacent. Because I don't really want to draw the line that you have to be CG to be on my show or on my guide. Not at all. Yeah. But you just can't be anti.
I'm hoping we can get to a point at some point where indie comics is just indie comics, and that us versus them mentality kind of goes away. I know everything's all hot and bothered right now because everything else is going on, but I'm looking forward to the day where everybody is just, you're an indie comics creator, or you're working for Marvel, DC, Image, whatever. And that's the distinction, not Comicsgate, anti-Comicsgate, or whatever else. Because I think that eventually that's going to do more harm than good when you get into that.
I don't disagree. I think that you've got guys like Peter Simeti, who, in my mind, he's real alternative indie. Yeah. He's friendly with all sides. Yes. But then you've also got your people that, I know that Image is not really indie anymore, but you got guys like Jimmy Palmietti. You got guys like Eric Larson that are just constantly just throwing out divisive comments that if you voted this way, you'll like it. If you voted that way, you'll hate me. Yeah. And I think that what you have indie creators who are out there that want to glom onto those people, thinking that that's going to help their career or whatever. And those people, like you got a Bill Sienkiewicz, who I love his work, but I mean, he's so virulently anti-CG that if you want to stay on his good side, you better not be friends with anybody in CG. And I just think, you know what, Bill, F you. That's okay. It's not like I need Bill Sienkiewicz to sell my book. He's not going to sell it for me. He's his own person, and that's fine. But I feel like true indie are people who are self-publishing. The Kickstarter, the Indiegogo, the fundraiser, the going straight to Amazon, print on demand, or if you've worked out some kind of deal with Peter Simeti, or you've started your own company like Peter Simeti, That to me is the real indie. Boom. If you're able to license Star Wars comics, you're not an indie comic.
No, not anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you used to be, but you're not anymore. And that's fine. You be whatever you grow to be. I mean, one day, single people get married. One day, childless people have kids. One day, drunks get sober. I mean, you just grow, you evolve, you go to that next level, and they've done it. But to me, I said it earlier, it's the new punk. If you just said, hey, I don't need Marvel to decide whether or not my book's good or not. I'm just going to do it. I'll find several hundred people to buy it. And then hopefully several hundred more will buy the next one if I don't screw up the first one. It's all on you.
Right.
It's
to Jason's
That's
point
the great
earlier,
thing
though,
about
it's
it
just
is
like,
now it's become a meritocracy, and I think that's important.
Yeah.
I agree.
yeah, I mean, it should just be about like printing comics, right? You have an opportunity, you had an advantage, you're in an advantageous position in which you can actually print your own material without having to say, hey, can you do this for me? Which is always something that I'm an advocate for. I don't like going to somebody else and saying, hey, please, hat in hand, you are a mainstream / semi-mainstream publisher, and can you please print this for me? Now I'm excited by the geography of publishing your own work, having the avenues to be able to reach out to like-minded people and saying, yeah, do you like the way I draw stuff? I hope you like the way I write, so here's something that I'm producing. Yeah, will you back it? I love that because it was never accessible to me right back in the day. So
it's a new world now.
Yeah,
Now
I
I
love
will
it.
say this: I sent Thin Blue Line and Florida Man out to publishers that I mean, I didn't send it to Marvel or DC. I knew
Sure.
that's not their thing, right? But I sent it out to, I'll say, dozens, and we actually got some harsh rejections for Thin Blue Line. Florida Man, maybe not so much, and like I said, we may have picked up something with Florida Man, but I don't want to dismiss you trying to do that too. If you've got something that's completed,
Oh, sure.
or at least a few pages that are colored and a concept all ready to go, then do it. Is this yours, Eric? Oh, wow. Yeah, that looks
This is Eric's. Yes, this is book 2 of Arc Athena, and it's going to be a 6-issue arc. And I wanted to take a few minutes to touch on it because he's been gracious to be my co-host, and I really appreciate that. And I think
I
he's
just
doing
love
really
sitting
well
here
with this,
listening to
too.
people talk, man.
Yeah,
It's part of the
you're
conversation.
doing great. It looks like you're doing great.
So yeah, 25,983, 365 backers. You played the algorithm right by setting it as a
That's
$500 goal. So
That
you're at
makes me laugh.
5,000%. And
It's so ridiculous.
so you are. It says here 8 days left. Eric, is that also the second 30 for you?
No, I'm actually only doing at any given time 30-day campaigns because I want
Oh.
the book to be coming out at a specific cadence of release. Right? It's it's a mini series, so it always dovetails into the next book. And the last thing I'd want to do is extend the campaign that much longer, so that the story, the narrative, is not front of mind with people. So generally, at the end of the 30-day campaign, in about 2 months, you'll get this book, and we launch the next one right behind that. So so there is no in demand. If you miss it by way of campaign, it will eventually be available on iconcomics.com. But we're moving on to the next book because I just really want to get this story out there. It's 6 issues, and I don't want to delay. I'm incredibly impatient.
Well,
I
not
think
only
that's
that, but you've got
another thing.
most of it done, right, Eric?
Yeah. So that was another thing that I'd recognized when I'd realized that this avenue was available to in an indie space, was that people were in general, and this number gets thrown off by a lot of books that are way behind. The general number was from end of campaign to delivery to backers and customers was about 6 to 8 months, and more often than not, it's because people were traditionally, and I don't begrudge them for this, were using the traditional model of doing maybe 5 to 6 pages, as many as 10. They'd launch the campaign, and they would spend the time to, at the end of the campaign, they would spend the time to draw the book. And I thought, like, I don't think I could do that because, as I said, this thing is 6 issues by way of a miniseries. So instead, I finished all 5 books worth of art, totaling to each issue is close to 50 pages, so 200 pages worth of art up front. then launch the campaign, and I'm working on issue 6 now. That way I've got a pretty decent runway in front of me as people. I do not want to be the weakest link in the pre-production chain. You know, like I don't want to hold anybody up by way of my colorist, by way of my editor, and by way of my letterer. I don't want to be the person that they're waiting on. So I gave myself as much of a handicap as possible.
You're writing and illustrating? Correct. Nice.
Yeah. It makes it
kudos to you
easier.
for being able to do that. Yeah, I'm jelly about that.
Now, is API your printer, or is Icon handling all the?
API is the printer. Iconics is handling the distribution and the fulfillment.
Okay. Wow. Good team.
Excellent.
Yeah, good team.
So one of the other things I wanted to talk about was when we talked about the grind and I went off about my CG guide, was what I was really trying to get to is one of the shows I went on was Sci-Fi for Me TV, because in addition to the science fiction aspect of it, they also do things that are science fiction adjacent, like comic books every now and then. But I wanted to give Jason the floor for a few minutes here to talk about what else is available on his show and also the co-hosts that help him out.
Well, we've got a number of. I'm going to put that. I'm going to put a link to that interview, Brian, in the chat there if you want to share it. We have right now. We've got 5 shows that are currently in production. We've got several that are right now on hiatus, but we cover science fiction, fantasy, horror. We've got the .com, where we have movie reviews, book reviews, and that sort of thing. And then on the TV side of things, we have a general news program called Good Morning Multiverse. It runs Saturday morning. We have a horror discussion called Foreign Bodies, which looks at horror that's made outside the United States. We've got a Star Wars news program called Salacious Crumbs. We have Live from the Bunker. Chris has been on that show, which is a 1-hour interview conversation program that runs during the day. And then we have the H2O podcast, which was our first show, which runs Monday night. And it's me and one of my co-hosts. We talk about just general things. Live from the Bunker is getting close to episode 400. H2O is getting close to 300. Salacious Crumbs just cleared 139. So we've been doing these for a while. And some of them
That's
that are
amazing.
on hiatus we want to bring back, and a couple of them have to do with comics. We had a comics industry news program called Comic Con Carne, and that kind of plays off of my background being from Texas, and it goes along with the food gimmick, I guess, because Salacious Crumbs. Our Star Trek news is Tribble Bites, and our Doctor Who discussion is TARDIS sauce. So I don't know how food kick somehow, but
Sure.
Comic Con Carne was in there, and that was our general comics industry news. And then we've got a podcast that I want to bring back called The Rogues Gallery, which started off discussing DC television and movies. But I want to bring it back and make it more of a broad comics industry discussion where, generally my thing is the news and the opinion needs to stay separate. That's one of the things, one of the problems that we have with the mainstream media is that you have too much overlap. So our news programs are, here's our news. And we may throw a comment in there every now and again. But for the most part, the news shows are the news shows, and then the opinion shows are their own thing. So, H2O, Ranker Pit, Tartar Sauce, Deep Space Mines, any of those, Rogues Gallery, Level 1177, any of the shows that we have where we're just talking about things. And I'd like to do more of those, but, eventually I want to bring back the 2 comics programs. And possibly we've got a video game discussion roundtable that's kind of been sitting in abeyance right now, basically because we don't have the manpower. This is an all volunteer thing, and right now I've just got 5 people, and everybody's busy, everybody's got families, everybody's got jobs, so we do what we can when we can, and make the best of it. So we've been doing that for 13 years now.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
even this show like this, where we just come on and start talking about the campaigns, they take some time to prep and get in touch with people, create the banners. Even just the little show that I've got does take some time, And, on top of running 2 campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. And like you said, family, day job as a CFE, all of those things add up. So yeah, kudos to you for doing this for so long and so many different shows so well. I really appreciate the fact that you had me on. I did drop that link in the chat like you suggested. And it's a big help to the industry, I think. So really appreciate you, and congratulations on 13 years.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And it's been an interesting run. I'll say that. There have been some times, there have been a couple of moments where I've sat there and kind of wondered if this was the right thing to keep doing. And, we've gone on hiatus a couple of times, but we came back pretty much, gangbusters in January of 2019. And, just really started piling it on and doing the grind. And we crossed 2,000 subscribers here a couple of weeks ago. It's been slow, but we're growing. We're getting some more followers over on our Odyssey channel. So we're making progress. It's not as fast as I'd like for it to be, because, eventually I'd like to have enough revenue being generated either through the super chats or the advertisers where I can start paying people. Because ultimately that's the thing, the entrepreneur in me, I want to create jobs. I want to make it worth everybody's time to be a contributor, not just bragging rights.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, there was a downtone when you said, it could have been more at 2,000. I think you should celebrate that, man. That's
Oh yeah.
yeah, it is an achievement, and I recognize that it was a slog to get there. And as soon as we crossed it, YouTube scrubbed about 4 or 5 of them, and we had to cross it again, and then we had to cross it again.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a thing. And and YouTube creates its own setbacks, being on that, because we were monetized. We got monetized at the partner program, and then we lost the monetization when they changed the rules and the criteria. And when we went to Star Wars Celebration in Chicago in 2019 and managed to get enough views and subscribers and watch time to get that monetization back. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that we were the only ones broadcasting from inside on day one.
Sure.
Nobody else could get a signal, and Star Wars hadn't started theirs yet until Friday. We were there on Thursday, and everybody was watching us because nobody else was able to broadcast from inside, including Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers. He was able to broadcast from outside the building, but not inside the building. So I don't know how we were able to do it and nobody else could, but that was a big help too. So
that was definitely fortuitous. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
So, you roll with the situation as it changes. We've got some things that we would like to be doing more of. We had started with the live broadcast from conventions before, that was going to be the new model, and then pandemic hit and we were able to do that. But we did it at Worldcon. When it was here at Kansas City. We're the only website that's ever done a live broadcast from the World Science Fiction Convention, where the Hugos are. We did it at Planet Comic-Con, all the cameras and the computers and the lights and everything, and did it full studio on site. And I was like, this could be our thing. And then the bottom falls out of conventions. So,
Right.
we're all scrambling, but I do think it's been like you said, Brian, a little fortuitous, because a lot of these conventions are now understanding that they should have some kind of online component to go along with whatever they're doing on site. Now, of course, that affects, contracts and who gets paid what and stuff for appearances and whatnot. So there are limitations to that. But, you look at something like Reed Pop, they had a deal with Sci-Fi Channel, Sci-Fi Wire had its stage at some of the Reed Pop events. And I was talking, I was like, we could do the same kind of thing, but and not have a dedicated stage. We could cover the entire event because that's what we've done. So, it's just now, trying to get back to that mode where people are even thinking about doing that. So, it's the next challenge, I guess.
So yeah, lots more to come from Sci-Fi for Me TV, and I want to be there to see it happen. That's very cool. for the next 13 years, right?
Well,
Another 13.
I make the joke that we're on the 15-year overnight success plan.
Oh, okay. There you go. Okay. Well, hey, listen, guys. It's 10 after now, so we've gone a few minutes over. Don't mind going over now and then, but I wanted to thank you all so much for your time, for the opportunity to talk to you about these projects, and for your channel, Jason. So again, appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on here. This is only going to help grow this channel, and of course, I appreciate that as well. So we're going to start with you, Chris. If you could tell us where we can find you on the socials.
Chris Brawley, at Chris Brawley on Twitter. That's Bray. And of course, you can go to bleedingfool.com and get a hold of us through that way. Contact at bleedingfool.com. I also dropped a link somewhere in the chat. If anybody's got an active campaign for their comic, they can go right now and get plugged in and get an interview, hopefully in the queue for next Wednesday. Every Wednesday, we post Indie Comic Showcase, and it showcases 3 current active campaigns. And so, Eric, that gives you, you've got 6.5 days, so that could come on the last day of your campaign. We could be published next Wednesday. So
I appreciate it.
Thank you, man. So for sure, get that link. But I had a good time, and Eric, your book looks fantastic.
Thank you,
Jason. Congrats on 13 years.
Thanks.
At least make 12 more. Sort of make that 25. Sort of
Right.
12 years of actually making money doing it. And Brian, thanks again for inviting me.
You bet. Thank you so much, Chris. Jason, where can we find you?
The TV side of things, if you go to sci-fi4me.tv, that'll take you to the YouTube channel. We've also got a presence on Odyssey and Rumble and Twitch. And I've got this graphic here where you can see all of the different social media channels where we are on. We're on
Holy
10.
mackerel. That's awesome.
It's part of my don't put your eggs all in one basket strategy.
Right.
So, because with however many people are getting dumped off of Twitter and YouTube is doing their thing and all of that, I'm like, well, at some point somebody's gonna get mad at something we say. So find us on all the other channels too. So that's there. But we're really trying to build up the Odyssey channel. But over on the .com is where you're gonna find reviews and think pieces and some different articles there. And we've got a newsletter you can sign up for. But anywhere all over the place, you just look for Sci-Fi for Me and you'll find us. We were on tons of podcast platforms and all of the socials and stuff. So we're fairly easy to find. And I appreciate the time to get on here and talk about it. So.
Oh yeah, you bet. I appreciate you having me on your show. So it's the least I could do. Eric, where can we find you, please?
Don't do it. Just enjoy the 2 gentlemen that's on the show with us. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Jason. Jason, congratulations, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Brian, thank you for having me on. We've had enough talk about Arcana. Don't. It's okay. It's all right.
It's been a pleasure for you to come on as my co-host. I really appreciate the time.
This was
You're
fun.
always a pleasure to talk to. You've always got such insight, and your advice is valuable. So appreciate it.
Thank you, man. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for being here. Like
everybody.
and subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications when we come on next. Take care, everyone.
Good night.